Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of School Leaders Podcast with your host, Mohsin. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel and show your support. In today's episode, we have Mr. Lee, Miss Deborah, and Mr. Ian. We will be discussing the challenges of reopening schools during a pandemic. How has the start of the new academic year been so far? What changes have been made since opening the schools? And what has been the parent feedback? Schools have been reopened for the past few weeks with certain guidelines, which have been provided by the regulatory bodies. School leaders have faced a very challenging summer break to prepare for the school reopening. Ensuring students' health and safety is a priority, and reintegrating students back to on-campus learning. So let me start by asking Mr. Lee, how has the start of the new academic year been for you so far?
Thank you, Mohsin. Thank you for having me today. How has it been so far? It's been a bit like being pushed out of a plane and learning to skydive while descending. It's been an interesting challenge. To be honest with you, I think because the parents were so happy to have their kids back in school, it has worked out much better than I had anticipated. Everybody's really happy to be back. The teachers were happy to be back inside a school, inside a classroom. And even though we're only kind of pulling in a third of the kids each week, they're still really happy to be there, and it's been very smooth. I was just commending my parents the other day on how patient they've been and how happy they are to have the kids in class. The challenges have been we have inspections and surprise visits from all different kinds of authorities coming in, and so we're always on our toes. And I was telling my SLT team the other day, we're working on how to just execute a school day, and normally we're discussing academics and our pedagogy and how are we getting the best out of our teachers, rather than are we just being as safe as we can possibly be. So the conversation, this beginning term of this term, has really changed into, are we being safe? Are we following the myriad regulations that have been put upon us? And you know, there's been kind of that concern has kind of overtaken the academic concern, which we're normally discussing at this time of the year.
Yeah, I just want to add an actual fact as to what Lee said there, because one of the things that I've noticed is, and you mentioned patience of the parents, and I would say, and I'm commendable, to be honest with you, because they, like us, are finding out as time goes on. And it's one of the things that I've got as I've written down in terms of my notes, in terms of communication. But sometimes, you know, depending upon the language that you're using, that can be sometimes quite difficult. I'd say that the other thing that I don't work for ADEC, but to be honest with you, I have been genuinely impressed with the support that we've had from ADEC and the Department of Health. In particular, though, in terms of the leadership that they've shown, in terms of, well, you'll appreciate this coming from the Abu Dhabi area. You know, we've got a principal's hotline. We've been able to then, as a result, be able to give out feedback to the parents and to the staff. And again, that's one of the things that, as a priority, we've been trying to make sure that, you know, the staff themselves are not, because it's the one hidden agenda that really we don't talk about. We've talked about the children, we've talked about the parents because they're the customers, but the people who are delivering the material to the children, and I suppose what's important is what happens within the classroom. We've got to make sure that their health and well-being, and that's something which I've been delighted to receive the support from our management, because it's the one key aspect that they have been driving into us, that, you know, the well-being of the staff is absolutely, it's fundamentally very important. So that we've been lucky that way. I think the other thing as well, just to add, is just it's all the, as Lee was saying, it's all the other things, you know, I see things, thermal cameras, the one-way, all these other myriad of things that we've had to make sure that we introduce. And he was also saying about the idea of people coming in through the front doors to check, obviously, because it's all very well putting it down on a piece of paper. But one of the best things that ADEC have been doing is coming in and supporting and checking to make sure that, one, there's Qualtrics. So this idea of checking that these things are done, but also making sure that there's actually implementation, because it's all very well writing a good paper, and writing what you're going to do, but it's actually important that you implement, the strategies you've written down. So, but as I say, all of this has been, it's about the support, I think, as well. Parents, staff, our management, obviously as owners, but also in terms of, say, ADEC and the Department of Health. It's been enlightening, to be honest with you, and I think different parts of the world really should be taking a lead from, should be taking a look at what's happening here. I've been genuinely very, very impressed in comparison to my friends back in the UK in particular.
Yeah, lovely to be with you today, Mohsin. I'm echo sentiments of the gentleman here. I'd say the start of term has been exciting, exhausting, endlessly challenging. And Lee, you talked about jumping out of a plane there. We talk about building a bridge that you're still walking on, and we feel like we're doing that constantly at the moment. But above all of those things, I would say it's been incredibly fulfilling to see the smiling faces of the kids back in school. And they're so delighted to be back, as are the parents to be sending them back. And I think that's made all the hard work really feel worthwhile. Yeah. I will say that the start of term definitely felt more like week 53 than week 1. And certainly sorely missed the recovery time over the summer. But I will say that the time that the leadership team spent detailed planning over the summer certainly paid off as we moved into the start of term, and things probably went more smoothly than we could ever have dared hope for. As you say, Ian, planning on paper is one thing, but actually then moving into putting that into the physical site and then holding your breath while the students arrive to see, well, does it all really work in practice? So that was a bit of a difficult time, to not quite sure what to expect, but as I said, probably worked out better than we could ever have hoped for. And definitely the patience of parents. I think we're all sort of reaping the dividends of probably the understanding that parents acquired of just how difficult teaching was during term 3 last year. And I think our relationship with our parents is in a very different place than it was in term 2. And I think we're reaping the benefits of that now. Parents are incredibly appreciative of all of the effort that's gone into making things safe for their children.
Mr. Ian, what were your biggest challenges before reopening the schools, and how did you overcome them?
We've, to be honest, one of the biggest challenges was making sure that we're all, as they speak, in the same health and safety language, I think, more than anything. The start of the school is always the same every year. You're getting people ready in terms of teaching and learning, classrooms are being set up. But you had on top of that the agenda to make sure the health and safety of all concerned with COVID was in place. So it was, dare I say it, it was the other dimensions, such as the thermal cameras, the one-way systems, more importantly the training to make sure people actually understood, all very well having those thermal cameras, but where were they to be placed? Making sure that, as I say, we're making different, I say different individuals, but if you take the pod students, because every child's different, and we had to personalise on occasions the pod students away from the early years, which is away from. So that, again, that creation of the micro bubbles, the macro bubbles, to make sure that staff then realised that they couldn't meet. We were then having conversations through Teams and Microsoft. That was all, to be honest with you, the biggest challenges. That integration of all those other factors, which as far as we were concerned, were going to be very, very difficult. But we were blessed with the enthusiasm and the drive, to be honest with you, with all concerned. I think in the same way as term 3, because everybody started at the exact same level, and I would say this quite honestly with every single department, because everybody started with no idea throughout the world. I mean, the fact that Microsoft have changed quite radically in terms of going from the number of people that you can now see so that it looks much more like Zoom. So the fact that those fundamental changes were made by big organisations, everybody was learning as it was going on. And as Deborah was talking there about almost like you're creating a bridge as you're walking, you're creating a bridge as you're walking the water. It was a bit like that. There is a genuine implementation of health and wellbeing for all concerned. So even if you are coming in for a couple of minutes, or dare I say, if you're visiting as a student, for every occasion, all the materials that were put out, the sanitizing units, all those challenges to get all those things up, I think for us, we're say very, very hard to overcome. But we've overcome them, and I have to say, as I say, I'm very, very impressed so far with everybody and all concerned.
So uncertainty around expectations was certainly an initial problem, which meant that we couldn't start planning as early as we perhaps would have liked to have done. But then once we had got them, satisfying the 118 protocols that we needed to satisfy to reopen, that then meant lots and lots of strategic planning meetings with the leadership team. Once we had calculated that we could have all of our students on site and meet the social distancing requirements as a mathematical calculation, then the reality of actually trying to get that into practice was a challenge. So in terms of that physical setup of the classrooms, of the corridors, I have to say that a really creative leadership team and a really dedicated facilities team who have gone through the put it there, no put it there, now maybe it'll work over there, and have done a million different setups for us before we actually realised what was going to work best for us, has certainly helped us move forward on that, definitely. I think one of the biggest challenges, probably also in the longer term we'll see as one of the biggest gains, is finding creative new ways to do old things. And there's an awful lot of that still to do. We're still working on that, creating new ways forward. But I do think that necessity is the mother of invention, and teachers are responding with great resourcefulness. And you know, you tell them, no, you can't take the books into Mark. They will find another way to do that. And it's magical to see the wonderful ideas that are coming out of, well, I'm trying it this way and I'm trying it that way. So I think whilst that's a big challenge, I also think it's going to be one of the biggest benefits going forward. And the nuts and bolts of health and safety that Ian was talking about there, just that the million things of, so who's going to top up all the sanitizers every day? Who's going to do reallocating jobs to different people around the school to make sure that all of these little details are taken care of? So they're the sort of nuts and bolts of the health and safety, making sure that all of that is ticking over. But yeah, I think the magic will be in the inspirational teaching that our teachers are going to manage in amongst all of this.
Sure. I think what you're hearing through a subtext, which really has become a priority, is that the budget is really affected by what we're doing. We need to consider how many people we need for little things like sanitation, marking the school with all the things, with proper signage, and somebody's got to be responsible for that. So you're looking at actually hiring extra people, buying extra things, thermal cameras, so on and so forth. And these are our challenges in no particular order. The budget is one of them, making sure we can stick to that. And we're private schools, so we're only funded by our fees. There's no other place that's coming from. And a lot of parents were a bit reluctant to send kids back to school, because for whatever reasons that they might have at home. Normally we'd have a KG meetup day where the kids could come and get used to the school and get comfortable. Now you've got 3.5 and 4-year-olds coming in, and all of the adults are in masks. They probably haven't been out of the house for 6 to 7 months, and they're seeing these strangers, and you're supposed to hand them off, and mom can't come inside because she doesn't have a test, So you're trying to manage the apprehension that these children are having, which you completely understand. And even as you're bending down and getting eye to eye, it's still this. They're not seeing this kind face that they're expecting to see. It's a very strange thing. And then the technology and the engagement. The term 3 and everybody being 100% distance learning, we got that down to a science. I think most schools did that very well. But now you've got 10 to 12 in front of you in a classroom. You've got 10 to 12 who are going to come next week, who are sitting at home, and then another few or more who are never going to come to class because they're 100% distance learning. So our teachers, their struggle is, I want to engage with every one of my children, every one of my students. How do I do that? And it's easy with the ones in front of me, but then I've got 2/3 of my class sitting at home, 1/3 of which is never going to be face-to-face with me. I want them to feel that connection, and even our most experienced teachers are feeling that struggle. I don't feel like I'm connecting with my kids, Mr. Lee. How do I do that? And I think everybody knows it's just going to take some time. We're going to build this bridge, going to get across this, and we're inventing new ways every day get in touch with the kids. I think that's, as a school, we always say it's not about the building, it's more about the people. And right now we're trying to get the people connection. That's the challenge for us.
And if I just added to that, because it's really, really interesting just having this conversation. And it's funny you saying about, the idea of the difference between term 3 and now, Lee. Because one of the things that I found is that with term 3, we knew that the summer holidays were here. We realised that, within 12, 13, whatever, but now the realisation is, hold on 2 seconds, it's not. How long is it going to be? But the other thing that was really interesting, that as Lee pointed out there, now what we've got is a potential of 3 different models. So you've got 3 different pedagogies. Mm-hmm. And that means 3 different mindsets. And that, in terms of, dare I say it, the different outlooks that people have, that becomes the challenge, I think, to try and find a way that you are making sure that the customers are happy. But at the same time, and I mean that not necessarily from a financial point of view, but ultimately I've got to make sure that children sitting in front of me are being taught that teaching and learning is effective. And as I say, how long is this going to go on? We're having to change the models. And again, this goes back to the challenges. As we change the models, because some, as Lee was saying, they just because of the fear that they have, will not be in school. Others are being allowed to change their minds. And I understand why that's all happening, but this does become the difficulty that you've got for staff. So I agree with you. It's the challenges, to be honest with you, with those different teaching and learning models, which are becoming much more difficult. Very much.
So, Ms. Deborah, what has changed since you opened the doors, and what has worked well and what didn't?
What has changed since we opened? I'd be tempted to say parents' minds mostly. We initially asked our parents to choose their mode of learning in school or out of school. We started talking about in, out, and shake it all about. So we've got our in students, our out students. And then we've got in classes and out classes, and these bits in the middle classes that Ian was just talking about. Now, we initially asked parents to opt for their choice of mode of learning for 2.5 weeks. And then we said at the end of the 2.5 weeks, we'd give everybody the chance to review, and then they would get locked in for the remainder of the term. We are halfway through our 2.5 weeks, and the degree of change that we've had from parents, one parent who changed her mind twice in one day, and we had initially, and if we're talking about things that worked and things that didn't, we had initially, realising just how difficult it was to manage this hybrid situation of some children with you in the class and some children with you online, we had worked to try to minimise this for our teachers. So we had created sets that were in-school sets, sets that were out-of-school sets, and where we couldn't avoid it, some sets that were that hybrid mix. And those teachers knew that they were going to have that additional challenge of the hybrid. We very quickly realised that was not going to work. That the concern of parents wanting, and that they came in and they were so grateful for how hard we'd worked to ensure safety, but they were still anxious, and now they wanted their child to learn from home. We had other parents that were nervous to begin with, but now everyone had gone back and the sky hadn't fallen in, and now they wanted their child in. And I'm sure in some cases children putting pressure on their parents because they wanted to be in with their friends. But we also quickly realised that as well as the parents changing their minds, we were going to have students that had chosen to come in and then couldn't come in. Maybe they had symptoms, and so we were telling them to go home. Maybe they had had contact with somebody that then tested positive and were needing to quarantine. So we very quickly realised that whilst we'd set up a system that we thought was going to help our teachers, actually it was unsustainable. So this is something we have decided that we now just have to accept, and each teacher will have to accept. And so if you're listening, guys, sorry, because I've not told you this yet, every teacher is going to have to accept that they are potentially having a hybrid class. So whilst we can try to make some of them fully in or fully out, everybody does have to accept that their kids may be in and out depending upon circumstances. And that does then come back, as Ian and Lee have said, this definitely is going to be the challenge of the term. The in-teaching is fine. It all looks a bit different, but our teachers are creative enough to make lessons exciting, even with social distancing. We got the out teaching sorted, had a time of it, we got that sewn up. But this coping with them in and out at the same time is definitely going to be the challenge of the term. Lee, you talked earlier about the fact that the start of term conversations were not about pedagogy, and you're absolutely right. And now we're sort of 2.5 weeks in, and we're just now starting to say, right, teaching and learning groups, here's some cameras, here's some lapel mics, here's some tools, go and play. And let's come up with some really creative strategies for different ways in which teachers can approach this hybrid teaching environment that everybody is going to have to cope with at some point. I think it's quite exciting, and I think we're going to come out with some really creative stuff. But I also do appreciate that it's really challenging for teachers, and teachers very much like to feel in control of their classroom and know that they're doing a good job. And it's a struggle for them when their lessons are not going as perfectly as they would like.
To be honest with you, most of mine is almost echoing what Deborah was talking about there. I have to say that one of the biggest challenges that we in actual fact came across was, you were talking about the hybrid model there, Deborah, and this is one of the things that, fun enough, we had come across, because how do you get a situation where you potentially got kids in the home and you've got kids at the same time sitting right in front of you? So we decided to employ the idea of having a mic, as you were talking about there, put through Teams and have data set as a combination. And to be honest, that has been interesting, because for some people that becomes quite natural, quite easy. For others, it doesn't. And again, what you've got there is the personalities of teachers. Some are very introverted and don't like that idea of sitting in front, don't like that idea of being recorded. And that's not that they're fearful, and it's not that they're bad in teaching, it's just that they are conscious of their own self-being. So that to us is also been a big challenge. But I have to say, the one thing which I am really enjoying is also seeing some of those people come out of their box, say opening up these strategies which I would never have thought of before, or even doing different ways in which they can engage the students. But I think one of the biggest things that I would like to see, though, out of all of this is, for the first time I've seen with ADEC a hotline for principals, and I think that's been really good. I even think things like this, the fact that we are sitting here talking about this and having an open discussion, the fact that the group, I think healthiness like that has got to be the way forward, because if we don't, I think what will end up happening is that, to be honest, we will not benefit from this, and that'd be a real shame.
I think it's apparent that we're all going through the same things, but in terms of this new, the new kind of building organization and what the pandemic has changed for us is, we've run a couple of drills on tracing if we should suspect the case, and what we had on paper we thought was perfect, was solid, and we thought, okay, if we have a problem in this macro bubble, then we can just shut that bubble down and the other two bubbles can continue. Well, once we ran the drill and we realized all of the contact points, we thought, well, closing down one macro bubble is not going to do it, because you've got a bus ride, you've got a neighborhood, you've got a stairway, you've got toilets. There's so many points of contact. So we've had to revamp kind of our circulation maps and make sure, that we know precisely what's going on. I mean, safety's always been a concern, but this focus on safety, and Ian's right, the ADEC has been very helpful with this. This focus on safety this year is hyper-focused, which is a word I don't like to use, but it's a reality, and that has really changed for us. So once I ran that drill with my response team, their eyes seemed to open, like, okay, this is, obviously it's for real, and we need to be very specific that everybody knows what we're doing as soon as something like this happens.
Mr. Ian, in these challenging times, how has the parent feedback been in your school so far?
It's been very positive. It really echoes what Deborah was saying and what Lee was saying. I mean, to be honest, we've been very impressed with not just the feedback, but did I say it's not been destructive criticism. It's been constructive criticism. So the staff, dare say, have been really pleased with the way in which parents have come up and said, look, I really like that. Have you tried this? And it's been lovely. It's opened up the opportunity to build the relationships and have a much better, dare say, working partnership with the parents. So very positive indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Very supportive of the time and effort. I think they understand just how much work has gone into creating the new environment that their children are coming into. Or even if their children are not coming into it, they're still very appreciative of that, even if they're anxious and they're choosing distance learning. I would also say I've been impressed by how well they're rule following. Even parents that not great necessarily at rule following, pick up and drop off, have been going absolutely perfectly because they're all doing as they're told, which is exactly what we need because it makes life easier for everyone.
We've had a very similar experience to what Ian and Deborah said. Our parents have been very supportive, and we've had we have a couple who work for the DOH, and they've been very helpful in answering questions and offering support. And for the few parents, and I think we all have them that don't want to comply, I'm getting parental support, from other parents, helping them understand why we have to do the things we do.
Yeah.
That's been very helpful for me. Normally it's just us and they're coming at us and we're the buck, that's where it stops. But I'm getting other parents intervening and saying, look, they're doing the best for every child in this building. You've got to help them do that as well.
Great, thanks so much. And Miss Deborah, last question to you. Any tips and strategies for other school leaders who are watching this?
I think what's really worked for us is it's always a big thing for us, but more so even now, I think, is a sense of community. Our sense of community as a staff, our sense of community with our parents and our students, but also talking about this sense of community with heads. And I think one thing that the move to distance learning and the school closure in March did was it helped to break down the barriers that can sometimes be there between schools that see each other as competitors. And I think this was almost the head saying to their boards, their owners, look, I don't care what you want, but I need to be sharing with heads here. And I've seen a fantastic community and support, real genuine support for head teachers for each other. So I think that sense of community, finding lots and lots of positive ways to reconnect, both within your school and outside. I think the pressures and the expectations can be ridiculously high. Schools are having 4 inspections in a day, threats of sanctions for not getting it right. I think we as leaders need to absorb much of that and not simply project that down to our teachers and ultimately to the students. Of course, the health and safety is incredibly important, and everybody adhering to that is important beyond measure at the moment. But I think also just being with teachers, Ian, you're in there yourself, so you'll know this.
Yeah.
But no one's going to be conducting perfect lessons yet. And the new environment's just too new to everyone. So I think that sense of community where we're encouraging our teachers to be compassionate with themselves, actually. Don't beat yourself up because that lesson didn't go well. Just share with others and help each other to move along and to cope. So I think for me, the real big focus is that sense of community within our school and beyond.
I think that for us, one of the biggest, I suppose, targets right now is an acknowledgement of the entire community. And I mean that in particular for the support that we've had from the parents, definitely the support I've had from management, the owners. But most importantly as well is to celebrate the successes of the staff. The staff are going through an arduous time in terms of getting used to all these new initiatives, and to be fair, they're the ones that are in the front line, and they are doing a sterling job, and it's sometimes about the appreciation of them. So if I was to be giving any suggestions, it would be, please make sure that you don't forget about the staff and that you are celebrating them regularly, to just say well done. And whenever things are not going as well as Deborah's saying, because as Deborah saying, it's not about perfect lessons right now, but when things are not going well, just be wary, a bit more cautious, because people are going through different mindsets and different ideals about what this virus really means for them. So,
yeah, I would completely agree with what Ian and Deborah said. We, as principals, we've been kind of managing this deluge of information all summer, so it's part of our lexicon. But the teachers, they had a break. They were away from it. The parents, they had a break. They're away from it. And so it's all new to them. So their mindset is they're just getting used to all this. So what we think is common sense and we understand are things that have to be done, this is new to them. just as we encourage their kids to ask questions, they're going to ask questions too, and so there has to be patience, there has to be this communication with them. And so like I have a class dojo with 882 parents in it. They're my class, the parents are. So I communicate with them on almost a daily basis. I send them videos. I model for them what their kids are seeing in class. So they're seeing Mr. Lee every day in a video, and we're having, kind of a conversation back and forth. I haven't Zoomed or Googled with them all yet, but that may come. But I think that the communication, as everybody knows, is just so important. And what's been also important for us is we talk about the kids' safety so much. We have to remember that the teachers are involved in this too, and they have families.
Absolutely.
They're away from their families, and they have children, and they're separated from their children during the day. Even if they're in the same building, they're separated from their children. So we have to remember to check on their well-being. And I've got my counselor working double time with the teachers and with the students, and with triple time, really, with the parents as well, so that everybody knows that they're being cared for and that they're part of our community. And nobody is more important than anybody else, because everybody is important.
Thank you to our lovely guests for joining me today. Please make sure you like and share this video. And until next time, goodbye.